You could please take your seats, we can get going. Right. Where is Stephanie? Did she? Stephanie, she's still there? She's here, though, I think.
She is here.
Yeah.
She may have had to.
There she is. All right, I'll go through attendance since Stephanie is on her way back. I'm here. Alan?
Yes, I'm here.
John? Greg is coming, I guess. Michelle? Jim?
Yes, here.
Stephanie?
Here.
Huh? Jen?
Here.
Lisa?
Here.
Michael? Julie? Peter? Assuming Greg comes, we have a full house and a quorum. So we'll move to the next item on the agenda is an opportunity for the public to comment. Seeing no one, we'll move on to the next item, the consent agenda. Are there any comments? Hearing none, the consent agenda passes. We'll move to the board, to the chair's report. I just have a couple of comments, short thing to say. I think everybody knows that we did receive 2 letters from the state about our projects. Those are confirmation letters from the state. According to what I know, Pat, you can chime in if there's something more, but essentially those are the formal commitment letters from the state regarding the 2 projects. Right?
Correct,
That's
absolutely.
it. I mean, that's about as much as we're going to get here on the subject. There was questions regarding the bond council and how that plays into the process. Without getting into the nuts and bolts of how Hartford works, the point, I guess, is moot in that the bond council met last week on the 29th.
Bonding commission.
Bonding commission?
Commission, not council.
Excuse me. Stand corrected. The bonding commission met on the 29th to approve a number of finance activities. Among them was a line item for school construction projects, which of course our 2 projects were part of. That item passed. So at this point, I would say these projects are finally in a state of just about normal or business as usual. And I say just about because there's one last submission, which is a it is a modification to the ed spec as a result of the design activities that we've been going through, and I believe that's on the agenda for this evening, or at least it was. Yep. There is an action to review the changes to the ed spec, so I'm sure Greg will talk to us about that. And then with that, the building committee, the next step will assume its natural posture in being able to run the project, subject to all of the gates that are there per DAS's public policy. So with that, I think we're almost ready to put a point on this portion of the project. So my last comment is I'd like to announce an appointment to the building committee. Jay Hubblebank has volunteered to join the committee, and I believe he was there this evening. So he's
He's the chair for years. Yeah.
sorry.
I was just curious, he was a former BOE chair?
Yes, yes, and also a second selectman currently in Washington. So I think Jay's experience as and he was also a business manager in the public school system. So his experience on a number of fronts, I think, will be very beneficial to the building committee. And I know he's not here, but I want to thank him for raising his hand and volunteering. And thanks to Michelle, who also, I think, perhaps prompted this Jay's involvement. But welcome still, and thank you for that. Okay, Pat?
Okay, good evening, everyone. Couple of announcements. I'll do the leave of absences first. We have Fran Bellinson, a special educator. She's out on a leave. Jennifer Carrigan, she'll be leaving in February, have a little baby. Cindy Cazuto, a paraprofessional, is out in November. And Julie DeSenza, who'll be leaving in February, and she's having her second little baby. So some good news there. Congratulations. The CABE convention, I won't go into it in great detail, but I do want to let you know that Michelle Gora and Teresa DeBrito and Karen Files and I all went to the convention. It was Friday, November 17th and Saturday the 18th, before Thanksgiving. It's always that Friday and Saturday. It's a great convention to attend as a board member and as a superintendent because it is directly related to the job of board members and superintendents, roles and responsibilities, new laws, updates on policies. We had a wonderful educational time. It's time to not only go to sessions, hear some wonderful keynotes, but also to collaborate together. So that was very beneficial. I did go to a couple of different sessions. I guess one of the best ones I went to is really the focus on social and emotional social emotional welfare of students and really making sure that we are educating the whole child and some of the different programs and curricula that's coming out throughout the state that you can use, some for free, some for not. So it was very beneficial. The presenter was from Connecticut, Central Connecticut State University, and I have a card, and I think she'd be a great person to have come in and speak to the staff. The keynotes were interesting. The first keynote was a professor from Princeton. I want to get his name correct. Daniel Padilla Peralta. And he came to the United States from the Dominican Republic in 1989. And he wrote a book on undocumented and just the story of undocumented immigrants from DR and how they're living now. And I found it very interesting because he grew up in Queens and Manhattan, where I kind of grew up, so I knew a lot of the places he was talking about. What was really great for me was that afterwards I hunted him down and hooked him up with the Life Touch people, and those are the people that I went on the Dominican Republic memory mission to build a school in Costanza. So he's going to try to do that. And I got his book signed from one of the people who runs the mission who just retired. So I thought that was just a great closing of the circle for me. The other, there were two other speakers, a gentleman in the evening who has been on CBS a lot. See if I can find his name. I'm going to send this around. But he really talked about technology and how the world is changing and things that are just going on that are just, you can't even wrap your head around, and how are we preparing kids for the future and what the world is going to be like. And unfortunately, I cannot find his name right here, but I will. And then Saturday morning was very interesting. Bridget Cooper. And Bridget Cooper was, I didn't love her. She really talked about stress management and how to really move forward in stressful situations and how to be kind and how to try to, really hold yourself as a professional and how to be civil and respectful. But I have to tell you, she grew on me as I moved away, and I shared her story about the bubble at Thanksgiving, and she just shared a story about how her sister gets crazy at Thanksgiving because her mother drives her crazy, and her sister leaves the house and drives away and leaves her kids, and her sister doesn't understand how she's good. She's just there, and she's good, and everything's fine. And she says, well, I'm in a bubble. She says, and everything just kind of like slides right off me. So I was telling my family about the bubble on Thanksgiving, so that was good. And the other guy's name was David Pogue, and he is really very interesting. He's on CBS Sunday Morning very often, and he was just really cool. So I'm just going to share this because this is every year. It's similar but different. But if you can go, it really is beneficial. I can't tell you how much we get out of it as going as a team. And Karen went this year to really look a lot at the CABE Awards and what the different school systems had won and how we can up our game as far as our publications and videos, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the CABE convention. I did go Friday with Bob Geeson to the AIA meeting, and the AIA is the Architect Institutes of America, and every year in December they have a great meeting. And the beginning of the meeting, Costas was there, and Costas Diamantis from DAS was explaining all the new rules and regulations about DAS. And I was able to grab him afterwards to find out about our equipment grant. And he said to me that our equipment grant is on the priority list. But they said to Jen today something different, and that they're going to roll it in with the construction grant. So we need to get clarification. But the thing he did said, and both of those things kind of coincide, is that we're good to go. Our equipment grant is $1.6 million, and it will be funded hopefully at 80%. So we're very excited about that. A couple of other things. Just wrote some notes. I have here for you, we just got this on Friday. NEASC is the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, and that's the accrediting organization at the college and the high school level. And in, I believe, 2015, we had our 10-year visit. And then in 2017, which is now, they've reviewed our 2-year progress report. And so you can see that we continue to be accredited. So that's great news. Accreditation is very, very important for high schools. And I always kind of talk about, think about going to a doctor. You wouldn't want to go to a doctor who didn't have accreditation from an organization that you trusted, American Medical Association, et cetera. So this is what NEASC does for schools. So this is something to be very proud of. You can read, they gave us commendations that they were pleased about in our school. And then they wrote, the report should provide detailed responses to the highlight recommendations listed below. That's on the second page. And that has to be submitted in the 5-year report. But I think it's important that you know about the accreditation. This Friday is the opening of 1940s Radio Hour at the high school, and I hope that you will try to attend. It's Friday night, Saturday at 2 o'clock and 7 o'clock, and Sunday at 2. And I'm always blown away by the professionalism and the talent that our kids and our staff and our parents put forth. So if you can make it, it's going to be a great show. And then the other thing I just want to give you an update is Panorama, just so that you're aware. March this year is when we'll do the parent and the student survey. It'll be aligned with the parent-teacher conferences, and the staff will do their survey in May. So that you're aware, if you were wondering about Panorama, that's the schedule for this year. And I believe that is my report.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, building committee, or committee reports, and first up is building. Great timing, Greg. You want to save the building for when we get to the motions, or you want to, something?
No, well, I think probably it's the best to put it all in one, because that way I can be more efficient.
Okay. And I did announce Jay joining the building committee.
Yes.
So
You have formally appointed him?
I have.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome. At Advance, Michelle, anything?
So I have the Ed Advance annual report here. Does everyone get this in the mail, or did it just come to me? You did all get this. Okay. So the only thing I was going to point out, you should take a look at it because it sort of highlights all of the things they do. But the last page on the cover shows you all of the different programs that we're participating in. So that's always, if you seem sort of overwhelmed by looking at all of their budget information, you can look at the last page and look at the different programs that we're participating in, and also look at some of the things that they offer that we're not participating in. So I just wanted to bring attention to that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Michael, education?
So we had our second Education Committee meeting this evening, and it went really well. It's very exciting, especially on the science side. You're going to be hearing shortly from the science teachers as well as the administration about some proposed changes on the science side. And as a committee, we endorse that and endorse that they move forward with talking with the board as a whole about some changes in the science curriculum that I think are going to give our students even more rigor and more opportunities to take advanced levels of science. So it's pretty exciting.
It's good to hear. We look forward to hearing that. Facilities, Greg, back to you.
Facilities Committee has had some busy meetings. We are,
I know.
Facilities Committee has had some busy meetings. We have been looking at a variety of things, including work that needs to be done in the various buildings that is not part of the Ag STEM project and that's going to be required. We have been looking at some accessibility issues and other things at some of our schools, and we continue to look forward to the fact that over the course of the next budget year, we're going to have to start addressing some of these long-term issues that are coming up. So I would expect to see additional expenditures that are going to be required to address some of the issues that are coming up in the building. And so Don has been working on trying to prioritize what needs attention at the first time. One of the things we've looked at is that we are about to have the backside of this room under construction. They are going to shortly, not shortly, but in a more global term of shortly, sometime at the beginning of next summer, they are going to come in and build a wall across the back here, basically between the words, the F in fiction and the F in fiction over here. And that area is going to be walled off, and it's going to be under construction on the other side of that. We're sitting here at a point in time when we have to, we see boxes of books leaving this library on a regular basis because they're being removed. The use of how this space is may change, and I have asked our staff to try to give us an indication of what they see for things like this room. Because the time if you need to make any physical changes to deal with the next 15 years or so, the time to make them is when you have a mobilized construction crew on the project and you've got the room under construction. It's not to have it all finished and then come back in 2 years later and do it. So there are things like that we have to keep an eye on for facilities as to where we're going and what our building needs are and what our program needs are going into the future. So we're looking at a variety of things on facilities, and you're always welcome to attend our meetings and see what the latest way we've devised to spend the money in the budget is. So thank you.
Thank you. Finance, Michelle?
Yes, we met just before this meeting. We went through the finance, the books as we usually do, and there was really nothing to report. All is going well. We are currently at 4.1% of the budget remaining, which is about where we were last year. So all of that is looking good. We spent a little time talking about getting ready to prepare for next year's budget, and some of the things that will be impacting next year's budget, including Ag STEM. And we also talked about the audit of the 2016-17 year. That is going well and is looking like it should be finished shortly in the next couple of weeks, which is a little ahead of schedule. So great job to Bob and the staff in the office and for getting the audit work done so smoothly. We also talked a little bit about Ag STEM expenditures, which are on the agenda for tonight. the equipment grant, which was already addressed, and just the state budget and the fact that there are still some unknowns about how to implement some of the items that were passed in the last budget. So that's it. Are there any questions? No. I guess just one thing I would add is that in November, I did go to the Board of Finance meeting in Roxbury. I'll be getting to Bridgewater in January because they meet every other month. But so the two town boards of finance meetings I have gone to, most of the questions for me have been around AgStem. So we will, as we move forward, especially as we're looking at our next budget, we will make sure that we're communicating the financial impacts of this program to the region. So that's on our radar.
Thank you.
Sure.
Alan, long range?
We haven't met, waiting for all the short-term changes to take place before we embark on long-range changes.
Negotiations, Greg? Anything?
We'll shortly be beginning a season of negotiations, but right now, for the rest of this year, we have nothing.
It's quiet. Okay. Policy? Sure.
We have several policies on the agenda for tonight, so I'll save that. But I just did want to mention that Teresa and I went to the policy workshop at the CABE convention, which is always eye-opening. We got to see Vin Mastraro, who's just sort of the policy guru for the state, in action, and so that was fascinating. But I also came away feeling like we're on top of things. So most of the, which was good. It's a huge packet of policies that were affected by the recent changes in law, and most of them we have either addressed or are on our agenda. So that was good. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. Well, the floor is still yours as we move into your
Okay.
policies and first reading.
All right. So, all right, if you open your packet, your electronic packet, following along will be a little bit easier. The first one on the agenda, 4118.11, personnel non-discrimination. This is for a first reading. And if you open, let's see, are there two versions there? No. If you open the version that was sent to us, what's happening with this policy is we are proposing to adopt CABE's version of this non-discrimination policy wholesale. There were a lot of changes from our previous policy, and it was too much to line through it all. But if you look in your packet, where I saw it earlier, why can I not find it?
It's there.
There's just.
The Region 12 one is there.
Well, no. The proposed one we have now is there, and there's just one little orange on the first page, well, you may not be able to see it, but all the strikeouts are.
Yeah, I must have been looking at a different one. So, in our current policy, I'm in the right packet. I saw this earlier. Our current Region 12 policy has a bunch of language in it that we're not carrying forward because it's really procedure and is in the handbook. It was so we struck that part, and I'm trying to figure out why I saw it earlier. Maybe it was in the policy. All right. Well, so the new language, if you look at the one that's being proposed, there's a definition change, and there are some new some legal references at the end. That's weird. All right.
Jim?
Are there any questions?
I move that we set 4118.11 for first reading.
Okay.
Okay, any questions? Actually, I do. Michelle, there are two numbers on here. It's 4118 and then 4218. What's the significance of the, is that a change then in are we going to roll the policy number?
No, so it's cross-referenced. So see where it says certified, non-certified? So probably the 100s are certified and 200s are
Sorry,
non, or
non-certified.
whatever.
Got it.
Sometimes it'll be 4,000s, 5,000s faculty, students. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
cross-reference. Sure.
Any other questions? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstain? Motion passes for approved for first reading.
Great, thank you. This is the one where they're both there. This is the complete replacement. I was like, wait a second, I just looked at this. All right, so the next one on the agenda is 5145.4, correct? Okay, non-discrimination. All right, this is the one where we replaced it and we did not put the lines through because there was so much change. So if you look at the new policy that we are proposing, the CAVE version, it's really an Americans with Disabilities Act, and everything in this new proposed policy deals with the ADA Act, and it's mostly definitions with a very little bit towards the end talking about the Director of Pupil Services coordinating this policy. If you look at the way this is different from the policy that we currently have, we had in the current policy, there is a complaint and grievances section that's actually part of regulations and procedures that doesn't need to be in the policy. And towards the end, there's an on-campus recruitment section, which is covered in our directory information. So we had several different areas in one policy, and we're kind of cleaning it up by going to the new policy, which deals just with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the things that were struck are covered in our other policies, if that makes sense.
Jim?
Michelle, did Allison O'Hara have input on this?
I don't, did you talk to? Yeah. Thank you.
Jim?
Move we adopt 5145.4.
Jim, can you do it again, please? Thank you.
I move we adopt, the board adopt 5145.4 as first reading of the board.
Okay. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstain? Motion passes. First reading policy 5145.4.
Thank you. All right, the next policy on our agenda is policy 4112.5 for a second reading under personnel, security, fingerprinting. The only changes were the two grammatical changes that we made from the first reading, a comma and adding the two. You should be able to see that on the copy that was sent to you. So there were no other changes from the first reading.
Jim?
I move we, the board adopt a policy 4112.5 for second reading as policy of the board.
Have a second? Lisa, thank you. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstain? Motion passes. Policy 4112.5 and 4212.5 passes.
Thank you. All right, the next policy on your agenda is 5113, students, attendance, excuses, dismissal. This is also a second reading. I don't believe there were any changes from the first reading. If you look at the changes that were made, they were very minimal, a couple of strikeouts and some the updates on the laws. Yeah. So if there are any questions about this one?
Pete?
Yeah, just question is, do we finalize these things or semi-finalize these things? Do we ever present them to the board's attorney for final consideration as to whether we're in line with the decisions we make on these policies?
We do not submit all of them because the changes that we're getting come from CABE and they're reviewed by both of their staff attorney. But we do send things to our attorney if we feel, if we have any questions about, for example, their impact on our contracts. But for the most part, we do not.
Okay. Is there a motion? Jim?
Thank you, Jim.
All right?
Moving right along.
I will move
Good job.
that the board adopt policy 5113 for second reading as policy of the board.
And who would like to second it? Second. Thank you, Alan. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstained? Motion passes. Second reading on policy 5113. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And the floor continues to be yours. You were on as a CABE delegate.
Oh, right.
Anything you care to share?
Yes, so I went to the delegate assembly. Always interesting. I think I mean, it's just voting on the platform. It was interesting. There was support for changing the start time for high schools to later, so that's interesting. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but CABE supported that. But what did come of that is I met Dr. Pam Vogel, who's the superintendent from Region 1, and Fran Koss, who's from Thomaston, superintendent. They're superintendents of small districts like ours. And we had some common interests in looking for more flexibility. There was a resolution up about Carnegie units that wasn't very interesting to most people, and they blew right through it. And I didn't feel well-versed enough to jump in and say, no, we should consider this. And another one, I think it was with teacher contracts and flexibility. I don't know if it was in start time of the day. But anyway, things that are important to small districts, looking for flexibility because of our constraints and our limited staffing and our singleton scheduling. So we talked about trying to get together as a group before the next delegate assembly to sort of get our ducks in a row and just see what other issues, excuse me, the other small districts are struggling with. I'll be back up at CABE in a couple weeks to go over the results of the assembly. So I was going to talk to them about trying to put together a meeting of small districts, maybe just the northwest corner, just so we don't all have to travel so far. And so I guess that's it.
Thank you. Ellen?
Excuse me. Excuse me.
What is a Carnegie unit?
I'm sorry. So that's seat time. It's basically saying, I don't know, I think there's like some set amount of hours, 600 hours, I don't know. Do you guys know? But it's basically saying a child must attend a certain amount of time in a class versus, let's say, a mastery, proving that you've mastered the subject and being able to then move on to something else. So the resolution was looking at a relaxing of the Carnegie units or seat time in a class and looking for a little more flexibility in mastery-based, proving that you've mastered something so that you can then move on to something else.
Any other questions? Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
All right, Greg, Ag STEM. Want to start with, we'll go with Bob first to review the financials? Sure. Bob?
In your packet, you got a summary of the report. The only change from last time was the final item. It's the test hole for the perk tests that need authorization for payment of $3,650. And that then leaves you with, of the authorization, 59% left of the authorized by the board at this point in time. It's at the bottom of the second page. Yep. Payment pending building committee authorization. Unfortunately, I didn't stay, I believe it got approved.
It has been authorized by the
There you
building
go.
committee.
Just a point of information, everybody knows where the Zoom button is. It's on the little black bar in front of on your screen. And there's a little magnifying glass because it helps if you know how to zoom in with these tiny little, if you click on it, you'll see the bar will come up and you can zoom.
I believe it will come through Greg's next report under the action items.
There it is, and then you can zoom.
That's all I
Any
have.
other questions? Jim, did you have a question?
No, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for Bob regarding the financials? Greg, do you have any comments you'd like to add to the financials before we move on?
I do not.
Okay. Then
Okay.
Please. I'm just giving you,
I didn't mean to be so, I didn't mean that to be such a dramatic moment, but the building committee had a meeting this evening from 5:30 until about 7 minutes past 7, and I apologize for being late. But we had a lot on our agenda because a lot's going on. We are at the stage now where, just to remind you that the legislature approved the bonds. The bonding commission has approved the bonds. The state has issued a letter, a binding obligation to loan the funds to us. And so we're moving forward. At this point in time, we're working on the completion of the design development phase of documents. Once that's completed, we'll move into the construction phase of documents. After design development's completed, we'll be meeting with the DAS to go over the design of the school at that point. At some point in time, we will, at that meeting, hopefully, we will also resolve any outstanding issues they may have with the amendments to the ed specs that we're submitting in order to conform the ed specs with the changes in the program that DAS mandated that we do and that we've done on it. So that, you know, we expect to have all those processes wrapped up shortly. We expect to be finished with that design development process sometime this year and moving into the next phase after that. There are a lot of things that have to be done. Among them, we have to complete the design of the septic system, and that's on tonight's agenda for that because that has to be done in order for us to make the local applications for permits and whatever else that we need locally, the health department approval and whatnot. So we have to move forward on that. We need to complete our traffic study in order to have the bonded funds paid to us, and that's something we're gonna move on right away. We've also got a lot of other things on the agenda. We've got. I'm going to be shortly sharing this with you as soon as this is in final form, but it's a list of all the things that have to be done and when they have to be done in order to deliver the building on time. And I just got this tonight, and you will eventually see it. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done to get to that bid phase, and we are on a very tight schedule. So that's sort of where we are. One of the things we have to figure out pretty soon is what we're going to do when we close off that part of the school and we close off the areas at that end, what we're going to do with the classes that are currently held in there. And so there have been planning between our staff, between Kim and her staff and between O&G and the architect, Castle Booz, to come up with an idea of where the construction areas are and where we're going to relocate the science labs and other classrooms. They currently have a very work-in-progress plan. One of the things we have to decide is the degree to which these temporary classrooms are going to function as real science labs. Right now, we have one science lab with gas and water. And the question is, how many labs are we going to have, temporary labs are we going to have with gas and water? Because any lab, you got to put a fume hood in, we found out tonight. You're going to have to pierce the roof. There's going to be a structure that has to be put up there. It's got to meet current code. This could be a very expensive process. And so one of the things that we've asked the architect and the construction manager to do is to give us options. Because frankly, I'm not interested in spending an enormous amount of money for a room that's going to be used for a year to 18 months. And so we're going to have to make some hard decisions. We've also asked them to give us cost options on acquiring temporary structures. You know, they will literally rent to you a trailer with a science lab in it. Their initial reaction is that will cost more than what you're doing, but after Chuck Booz gave us the presentation of how you have to put a fume hood in, I'm sitting here wondering, I think we could buy a truck with a science lab in it for less money than that's going to cost. So, these are the things that are preoccupying us, and we're going to be coming back to you very soon, probably on the 18th, the meeting on the 18th, and asking for full authority to go forward with this project. But I can already tell you that there's going to be money we're going to have in order to just get the mechanical engineers to study what they need to do to get gas and water to these temporary spaces. Some of them have water. None of them have gas. Well, gas is easy. You're going to put a gas bottle on the ground and you're going to run a line in. So that's what we have right now for our one functioning science lab. So there's a little bit of mechanical work that has to be done in order to figure out how you're going to do a fume hood and what have you. It would be much easier if we could discover that the cost of a temporary facility was less than doing this, and it may cost us a few dollars to get there. So expect that on the 18th I will be coming back to you not only to ask for full authority to spend the entire $32-odd million bonding to go forward with the project, but that I may also need some additional funds in order for us to figure out what it's going to cost to relocate these classrooms. Over the course of bargaining down the price of this project with the state through their processes, there is no money in this project for establishing these temporary classrooms. And so that's money the board is going to have to be planning to budget. And therefore, our goal and our game plan is to be able to have the board in possession of the board and the administration in possession of the information they need by the end of January in order to put into our budgets what the cost of these temporary relocations are going to be. Now, some of the relocations are going to be permanent. The robotics lab is going to move from there down to the far end of the building into a location that it will remain in after AgSTEM is built. So there's at least one classroom that we figured out a way to make the relocation now that won't have to be relocated again. But the science labs will all have to be relocated, and a few classrooms will have to be temporarily relocated. So that's something that's going to take a lot of our attention coming up. The building committee is also setting a meeting schedule for next year, and I believe we're going to be meeting on Mondays, probably the second and fourth Monday of the month, and we're going to try to keep them to Mondays if we can. We're going to start meeting at 5 o'clock on Mondays, and that way we won't be interrupting any nights that board meetings get pushed into. So that's where we are. That's what the building committee is doing, and I would be happy if no one has any questions to move into the action items.
Michelle?
I'm just wondering if this, I had originally thought that the science labs could be done in a summer, and is this a change because we've moved things? And if not, then I guess I kind of wonder why we didn't realize that we would need temporary ones when we were budgeting for this, but I really didn't, I thought the science labs were going to be a one summer job. Is that not correct?
That is not correct. If it was correct at some point, it is no longer correct. One of the reasons is there's a significant amount of abatement that has to be done, because these are within the existing building. And therefore, what happens is, we don't do abatement unless the school is not in session. So when the summer comes and the school doors close, that's when they start putting up a completely contained field, and they send the guys in with the white Tyvek suits to remove any hazardous materials. Once that's done, it's then part of the process of when those rooms get constructed. But these rooms the science labs will not be occupiable for at least a year, possibly longer. So it's going to push it right to the end of the schedule. And therefore, we're going to have an entire academic year with no science labs. All be temporary. And
When is the proposed start?
well, the proposed start is in the summer of 18, this coming summer. And that's assuming that all of the 18 things that are critical that have to be completed before we get to bidding occur on time to permit bidding to occur. It's currently scheduled to occur in the months of May and into the first part of June. And if that occurs on time, then we will start construction. Well, actually, we'll start mobilization in July to August, and if with any luck, we will start construction at the beginning of the end of the summer. That's when construction will actually start, and it'll finish at the end of the next summer. The science labs, however, are going to run. They're currently on the schedule to be constructed later, and they may not finish. And this schedule is still a little bit up in the air. They may not finish. The science labs may not finish until sometime in the fall of 19.
Alan?
Well, I was just going to say, we, because this seems rather crucial, maybe you should consider some of the Diebold donation for this, that we've always kept that money as separate and extra to the budget for this, for the project. And I know the stipulation was that the project had to be funded before they would, follow through with their donation. And I know that a lot of it counts for something that is very permanent, obviously, because it's such a sizable and gracious donation. But if it comes down to it, this might end up, from the size of that donation, be a small fraction of it, and that we might be able to cover rental of portable labs. If we might consider doing that as opposed to trying to work it into a budget. Just a thought.
I think that would be problematic on a variety of fronts. I'm not sure that's the spirit of the gift in which it was offered. And I frankly think we should not mentally spend that money in any way, shape, or form, because it was designed to enrich the program. And I think that we're going to have lots of opportunities to add things that have been knocked out or things that could be better enrich the program. And if we start spending it for things like temporary allocation of space or things that ought to come out of a budget, then I think we're going to regret it. But it's my personal view. I mean, the board will do what it wants.
That's a good point. And from what I learned from TV, you can put a lab in a Winnebago for cheap. So,
Michael?
Well,
I was just wondering if anyone has had a chance to speak with Doug Clement yet about how we're moving forward with Ag STEM, because you were just speaking about enrichment, for example, and I'm thinking it's just as important for us to roll out a communications plan the same way we're rolling out the construction. In other words, part of what we're trying to do is attract students to this new program. And if we're providing a steady stream of stories about, for example, the idea that Mr. Amato brought up about indoor farming as one feature that he could focus on. Another feature might be this $1 million Diebold grant and what we're thinking of doing with that. If we've got an articulated plan of when he's releasing those different stories, we want this in the public mind so that parents who are reading the newspaper in Danbury or in Southbury or in any of our catchment towns are thinking about, wow, this sounds like a great program, and maybe my son or daughter who's now in middle school could take advantage of this. I mean, those are the people that we really want to influence.
I think I think, Mike, that's an absolutely outstanding idea. I'm not sure it's for the building committee to do. We certainly would be happy to help in whatever way we could. But I think that's something that, I mean, I really think we need a plan for how we're going to roll this school out. And it's not too early to start planning for how we recruit, how we get the message out, and I think that's an outstanding idea.
So where I'm thinking, Greg, that your committee could be helpful would be to highlight for him briefly in terms of the construction of the program as it stands right now. Is there something, for example, about the equine center that's going to be new or different? You know, again, we don't want the story to be, yeah, we're the 20th and we're exactly like every other one. What are the things that we're doing as far as the construction that's new, that's innovative, that's exciting, that would get public interest going?
That's a good point, Mike. There are only so many things that could be innovative about hay and manure storage, but we'll do our best.
Is it worth saying anything?
Pete, sorry, Ed, you're...
Well, every time I come to a meeting and listen to the Ag STEM program, I've lived in 6 domiciles. 2 of them I had built. I never heard of a project coming in on budget. And I don't sense this project is going to come in on budget, not listening to what I just listened to. Is the board prepared on how they're going to handle a 5 or 10 or 15% cost overrun? Because you are going to run into problems no matter what you think. No one comes in on budget. So listening to Greg and other board members, I think the board, although we may not discuss it tonight, I'm not sure it's worth discussing tonight, but I never heard of a project coming in on budget unless people sacrificed a lot to get it on budget. And it doesn't sound like the board is sacrificing a lot at this point in the junction or the building committee to bring this project in on budget. So my question would eventually be, where are you going to get all the money from to do the cost overruns?
Could
I don't need an answer right now.
Well, I can just give you one comment, because I only know of one school construction project in my limited realm of the universe that came in under budget. And that was the last construction project Region 12 did for the $2.3 million we spent on the elementary schools. It came in about $180,000 less than $2.3 million. And we did that despite significant in-the-field change orders that should have ballooned the number above the $2.3 million. But we still managed to find economies. We'll find them in this job. Can I promise that we won't come ask you for more money? No. I'm already telling you we're going to ask you for more money because we need to spend what it takes to relocate those students to different rooms. I mean, unless you want them to not have to need a fume hood because they're doing their lab experiments outside. But nonetheless, I think we've got obligations that we have to do. And you're right, some of them are going to cost. But Pete, we're working hard to try to see what we can do to keep those numbers in reality. But remember, we didn't ask for a 2-year delay in the project. The state gave us that. We didn't ask for the increase in costs over that period of time. That's the way the economy gave us that. We didn't ask for 3 significant hurricanes to come ashore and do an unprecedented amount of damage, driving up the cost and limiting the availability of building materials. We didn't ask for that. Nature gave us that. So there's a lot of reasons why we might or might not make the budget, but it's not going to be for lack of trying, and it's not going to be because we don't push our construction manager and our architect to do the right thing. And one of the things we talked about tonight was when we looked at the plan for what they were sort of tracking out for where those temporary classrooms were going to go, unfortunately, we may have to scale back on how much we have in facilities in each one of those temporary labs. We may not be able to have 3 temporary labs that have the ability to handle chemicals and fume hoods, gas, and water. Maybe everybody gets water, but not everybody gets gas. So we're going to have things like that decisions that have to be made. But we are sensitive to it, Pete, and I think you bring up a good point. Where are we going to spend? We got to keep in our minds that we may have to spend some extra money to get this thing off the ground. I agree. I'm going to try to avoid it, but I can't.
Julie?
Greg, you mentioned the spirit of the intention of the Diebold grant, and I wasn't on the board back when that happened. So what was the spirit? Can you tell us?
I think it really was it was designed to be a commitment of money to kick the program up a notch, to enrich it. That was what I understood it was. That's how I read the letter that came in from the Diebold Foundation that Dudley Diebold and the great generosity of that foundation accorded us. And so I didn't think that this was $1 million that we could, would be using on nails and, sheetrock. It was more on the kinds of things that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do, but this would give us the ability to have a really top flight program. And that's why I've been trying to, every time someone says, well, we've got the Diebold grant, let's not spend that money. Let's figure out how we can use that money to take us over the top to the level that we otherwise couldn't have achieved. That would be a phenomenal use of that money, and that would make it the kind of resource that I know would make the donors proud, because they have a tremendous amount of support for this region and always have for scores of years that they've been here. So I know that that's the kind of thing. That was what I took away from it. Maybe I misread it, but that's what I took away from it.
John?
3 points. Maybe we should ask the Diebold exactly where they would like their $1 million to be appropriated. And my second point is, speaking about cost overruns, and are we going to see potential estimates on the 18-month temporary classroom situation?
Yes. The answer to that question is yes. We asked them tonight what they needed from us in order to give us those estimates, and what they need is, the architect is not charging us for their design services and figuring that out, but they have to charge us for the cost of the mechanical engineers that have to look at how we deliver the utilities to these rooms that we need. And so they could not give us a number of what it would cost just to figure it out, but there will be a cost for figuring it out and then a cost for implementing it. But in order to implement it, we need to know how much that's going to cost, and therefore we have to have the figuring out process first. We should know. I have begged them to please get me the answer sufficiently in advance of the meeting on the next meeting on the 18th of December, so that you will be able to have the information necessary for a decision, so that we can move this ahead in an appropriate manner, so that we can know what the cost of the temporary relocation is.
Okay, secondly, let's talk about the septic systems.
John, can you hold off until we get to that action, please? The septic
Yeah,
system.
sure.
Thank you. Did you have a third question?
No, there were 2 questions under the septic system.
Oh, okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. Michelle?
Greg, I was just wondering if you could explain just sort of briefly how tied the science labs are to what's happening on the rest of the building. Are hang-ups in one place going to slow down the science lab? Like, I don't understand why we can't get those started immediately independently of what's going on the other side of the building.
Well, when I get a little bit closer, I'll be able to get that from the contractor. But there's it goes to the issue of what work has to be done in order to produce those, and I believe that the fundamental driver of what the construction manager will be doing and what the builders will be doing is to make sure that we focus on completing the ag STEM improvements that are necessary to open the school in the fall of 19. And that means the north addition, the animal demonstration building, those items have to be completed, and the interior amendments to the property at the north end all have to be completed in order to open it, and those have to be completed by the end of August of 19. And so that's where their focus is. And I think that the secondary focus has been on the improvements, which will start, sometime in the winter of 19. But the science labs and the greenhouse construction has been taken as secondary because the greenhouse is not necessary, is not a necessary component of the 9th and 10th grade instruction that's going to go on for the students who are here in 2019. So we could afford to slide that into a slightly later time, so that it hopefully should be available for the second semester of that year. And I think that the science labs and the greenhouses are yoked because you can't really build the greenhouses until you have the science labs finished, because the skin of the building there is going to be replaced with a modern skin. So as far as I know, that's the principal reason. I'll try to press to see if there is not a more immediate reason that I'm not aware of.
Okay, thanks.
Michael?
Just a suggestion. I'm certainly not an expert on how to approach a generous donor. I think actually we probably need Julie's expertise for something like that, how a not-for-profit, for example, would handle a generous donation. But I don't believe the best way to approach them would be, so what do you want to use your $1 million for? I think it's incumbent on us to have the vision to say, here are our top 3 ideas. This is what we think it would cost. This is what we think the benefits would be. Do any of these seem attractive to you? So for example, if we wanted to look at something like, organic farming or farm to table, or using animals for therapy for special needs students. I mean, we have so many organizations that are ready or involved in that would probably love to partner with us, would love to have high school students learning about that in the curriculum at the high school level. I think just to give you my last example there's a great not-for-profit called Little Britches, which looks at using horses to work with special needs students. They do wonderful, wonderful work. They would probably love to partner with an area high school and talk about gaining a lot of interest from the general public and capitalizing on students who not only love animals but also want to work with kids. I think that would be great.
Okay. The subject is a good subject, obviously, in the board. I can understand the appetite to want to have this conversation about the grant. I mean, it is enormously generous of the family to make that gift. And we have to think about it. I know, Pat, you've had certain conversations already with them. I'd like to not consume too much more of tonight's agenda with this, because I do think it's a topic we should talk about thoroughly at another point. But would you like to, just a few comments?
We're almost.
I spoke to Mr. Diebold probably in November when we got the letters from the state for confirmation of the grants, and he was very happy to hear from us. I explained to him that we were working with KB&A and O&G, and I said we're very excited about the grant. And I said to him, let's do this. Once our design and development is done and our drawings are done, we'll have you you and your wife and your family in the spring so that we can show you our plans, and then we can discuss moving further on what you think might be the best way to spend that donation.
Thank you. And I think it's the right approach and the right way to do it, because I'm not even sure, Mike, you bring up great points. I mean, they certainly had something in vision, besides, and I do think Greg is right at a very high level. It was to take the school to the program to a different level. It gets cloudy probably from there, at least for me or for the board, to understand what does that short list look like, and so I do think getting the program, the context of the program as we see it today, defined and locked down, and understanding more about it, so then we can talk intelligently with them about what we're thinking, and because who knows how that might inspire them, and they might have ideas that inspire us. But I think right now it's probably up to us to get the program boxed, so we can go have a constructive dialogue with them. That's my sense, but it's exciting, certainly exciting. So Greg, any other questions for Greg before we move on to the first motions? So Greg, on the agenda is a review and approve the ed specs. I didn't see, are we prepared to do that this evening or no?
I think we could approve the ed specs.
Do we have them?
They were presented the last meeting, were they not? I thought we had them at the last meeting when they weren't distributed. I had them, but I don't know whether they were distributed to everyone.
I don't believe they were distributed.
Well, if they're not distributed, I suppose we're not,
We need to move it.
we're going to have to either do them sight unseen, or we're going to have to do them at the next meeting.
Sounds like next meeting.
Yeah.
So are they ready?
I think they're ready, yeah.
Okay. Could we distribute them then now, right?
I have no
Essentially,
objection to distributing them. Distribute them.
I don't know the extent of the changes, but it would be nice to be able to get them in advance of the next
Believe
meeting.
we
So we got
have-
2 weeks.
I believe we have a marked draft that was prepared at with a great amount of effort by Teresa. We gotta stop using Google Documents. They don't run marked drafts. There's the problem. So, but it was prepared. That can be passed out. The problem with it is that there are a lot of changes. And it's partly because things were moved and things were reassociated and whatnot. So it's a very change-oriented document, and I think the final piece that we will distribute along with the copy of it is an executive summary explaining what changed. But by and large, what changed is we created an educational program. We fleshed out how it had to be taught, what spaces were necessary for it, and we amended the plans accordingly. And that's really what it comes down to. That's the two-line elevator pitch version of it. This is nothing radical. This is what had to be done to deliver the program in accordance with the state standards and at the highest level for the students that are going to be in the program. And that's what we did. And we amended the building. We ended up having some classrooms went from each area having its own classroom to shared classrooms, which is something that DAS has been encouraging people to do. So that was one thing that we did to change the plans to share some classroom space. And so those are the kind of changes we have. And we just need to get we need to finalize that brief piece, but that's all. It's a paragraph. It's a short paragraph, executive summary, and then you'll see the amended documents. And my thinking on these is that we probably present, we approve them, we send them up to the parties that need to look at them, primarily DAS. And then when we meet with DAS on design development documents sometime, oh God, probably, I don't know if it's December or January, but probably January. When we meet with DAS, that's when we make sure that there are no issues with any of those documents. It's going to take until then probably, because I think when they're going to get them, they're going to say, oh, look at all these changes, and they're not going to understand that until they see the design why those changes are in there. I think that's an issue. We may have to send a copy of the design with it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely for next meeting. We'll have it done at next meeting. It's a little complicated, because it turned out there were a lot of changes.
Well, I guess if you can, that cover sheet you alluded to, or the exec summary would be helpful, not only
Yep.
for the board, but probably how you're going to formulate your thinking to present it to DAS in a way that gets them to understand it
Yeah.
simply and effectively as you'd like us to understand.
Well, I had hoped that I could make it so that it wasn't quite as changey.
Right.
But it's a fool's errand. It can't be done. The document is what it is. It's what it needs to be. So the real question is, how do we explain in no more than 3 to 5 sentences what's different
Okay.
and why? And I think that makes it easier to be reviewed, because when you take your first look at it, you're like, oh gosh, this is, I'm starting from scratch, but you really aren't. So that's what we're going to do.
Okay. All right. Floor is yours.
All right. Well, we're now at the point at which we've got to get certain things done in order to meet our deadlines and dates. We are going to for local permitting commencing this month, and as a result, we need to do a couple things. One of them we need to do is we need to finish the septic study, which really means the design. Now, we do know that they did perk the site, they did do deep hole tests, and they did determine that there are good soils for a reserve septic area. And there are sufficient good soils for, they believe, for the other, the 2 small septic systems. One to take the backwash water off the pool, and the other one to take the water used by the plumbing facilities in the large animal demonstration building. And again, the reason why we're creating a separate system for that building is because is almost certainly cheaper than installing the pumping mechanism necessary to get that effluent all the way down to the box, to the septic tank for our existing septic system. If it was an easy shot, if it was a gravity flow, we just put a pipe into our existing septic system. But unfortunately, it's so far and over terrain that's so flat that it would require an injection pump system. And we think that's going to be not only more expensive to install than a small septic area, but it's also going to be a small gravity-fed septic area, but it's also going to be a constant source of maintenance and a constant cost drain in the future as those things go. And then it'll have to be replaced one day because it's a mechanical system and it will fail. So that's why they believe they need that second system. So they believe they've got enough perkable land to do the reserve and those two systems. So now they need to actually do the design. And so that's what I'm going to need money for. And then we have two small invoices from FSM Services, and this is for the money that we had hoped to not incur, but we ended up having to incur to have somebody run the machine that we had on site and dig the holes. And so those are the last two items. So what I would look for is a motion to approve or a motion to grant the building committee authority to expend funds not to exceed $16,780 to complete the traffic study, and that includes the expending of the funds and the entering into whatever amendments or agreements are necessary to give effect to it. So that was the text of the motion, if someone cares to make it.
Second.
Thank you. Pete, question?
Well, I guess, does this more or less answer the question I raised before, that these are cost overruns that we didn't
Nope.
figure out?
These are budgeted costs within the project. We expected to spend this money.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Yeah, as a reminder, Pete, the first time this came up,
Right.
the original request was for the entire budget amounts, and Greg cut those down into a phase 1 and phase 2 to be or I should say, more mindful of the approval process of the project in Hartford. So this is coming back on the second phase or the balance of those projects. You're welcome. John?
Just to clarify, the entire cost of the two smaller septic systems are included in the 32.5 million, or are they over and above the 32.5 million?
Well, until we actually have all the bids, we don't know where they are, but we expected to spend money to upgrade our existing septic system. We now know that we don't have to upgrade our existing septic system because our existing septic system is functioning perfectly well, and it is designed for a much larger population than will be here if AgStem bust the doors at 250 to 300 kids. You still have fewer kids in the school than you did when it opened. And the septic system was properly designed. They determined it was properly designed for a school of the size of this one that opened with, some 1,000 students or more. It was designed for that capacity, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 students. I forget what the exact number was. And so we feel confident that our existing septic system is going to be fine. So there is money that we're not going to be spending on that. Now, one thing that we didn't expect when we first started down this road is that we would have to design a reserve area for our septic system. What happened is our septic system was designed prior to the state requiring that septic systems of this size be permitted through the state. And state permitting required a reserve leach field. Remember, this system was designed back around 1969 or 1970, somewhere in that neighborhood, 70, I think, 70, 71 was built. And so it was before they had that state requirement. So we now are required by a state law to show a reserve area. So part of the $39,252 here is allocated toward designing that reserve area. Part of that money is allocated to designing these septic systems for the pool, backwash, and the large animal building. But that is the total for the design related to our septic system. So this was not an overrun. This was expected that we would spend money. We didn't expect to spend it quite this way. We thought we'd be spending it on rehabbing our septic system, but we're not.
Alan?
Just want to clarify that B, the remainder of the work to develop the study, I think as you said, the word study kind of encompasses the difference between testing, not the difference, but encompasses testing and design. Because we had some overrun or a redo on the testing, but that's complete, right? This is to continue from the testing, which is hopefully finally done, and move into the design.
Yeah, this is really the design. It's more design than study because we've done the study. Now we need the design.
Yeah.
And so they needed to take the data points they got and figure out the flows and then lay it out and see where the good soils were and how they have to lay out the
I just want
septic.
to make sure that after the fall start, that whole issue is done and that's been paid for. This is for beyond that.
So, Alan,
Yes,
do you
we-
want to offer a friendly amendment to change study to design?
Well, but we haven't gotten there yet. We're still on the traffic study. I think it's been moved on A.
is traffic study. B.
I haven't gotten to B yet. I'm doing these as 4 separate motions. Do you want one motion for the
I'm
whole
so sorry.
I thought you were going one motion.
No, the question came up about septic, but we can do one motion, but I'll have to rephrase it.
Oh, the remainder.
I don't want to spend that money. I think it's really unnecessary to do a traffic study, but unfortunately, it's required by the state, and we aren't going to get 10 cents of the grant money without doing a traffic study because they require it. They need us to tell them that as a result of our new population, it's not going to cause a traffic disaster on the state highways. So unfortunately, it is what it is. I mean, it's because it's a requirement that everyone has.
All right, do we have any further questions on the traffic study? No. Okay. All those in favor of approving or authorizing the bonding committee to expend funds?
Building
Or the
committee.
building committee, excuse me, to expend funds for the traffic study not to exceed $16,780. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? All those abstain? Motion passes. Okay, motion passes to authorize the building committee to authorize funds for the remainder of the traffic study not to exceed $16,780. Greg, your next motion?
Yes, next motion, I'd entertain a motion to authorize the building committee to expend up to, not to exceed $39,252 to complete the septic study and design, including the execution of any agreements, amendments to agreements, scope of services, or anything else in order to accomplish that task.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, further questions? John?
Any calculation as to when the cost to install the two smaller systems, that being the large animal demonstration barn system and the backwash system? And are those two systems over and above the initial cost of the project?
Well, the backwash system is not required by the project. We don't need the backwash system for the project. We need it to have a complying septic system because we're currently putting that water onto the ground, and you can't do that. And therefore, in order to comply with environmental law, we need to have a system to put it into.
So that's not reimbursable.
So it's not, I don't believe it's reimbursable as part of the AgStem project. It's not part of the AgStem project. It's something we have to do. But the total number of, the total amount of expenditure, until we get the estimates, we won't know whether it falls within what we had budgeted, roughly budgeted for septic system work, which I think was about $250,000. But we're hoping that the total construction costs will fall within the number we had budgeted. It may be an issue on reimbursable for that, but we don't expect the backwash trenches are going to cost very much. This is not a complicated system for that. It's a very small system, but it just can't go onto the surface of the ground. It needs to go in the ground. And so you have to install some trenches. Not sure what type of septic system it is, because I don't think you're dealing with water that's basically chlorinated water. So I don't quite know whether or not that water, how that has to be treated. It may not be a conventional septic system. So we're finding that out. We'll know when we get the design work done.
Any other questions? All right. All those in favor or approve, raise your hand. All those opposed? All those abstain? Motion passes to authorize the building committee to expend funds for the remainder of the work to develop the septic study not to exceed $39,252. Next motion.
Yes, I'd like to entertain a single motion for items C and D. FSM Services are the ones that brought a backhoe. We had a backhoe, then with the backhoe on the site, and they dug the holes, and so that we could have perk tests and deep hole tests. And so I would look for a motion to authorize the building committee to expend $3,650 in order to pay the invoice of SFM Services for the excavation operations in connection with the septic study.
Second.
Okay, any questions? All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? All those abstain? Okay, the motion passes to authorize the building committee to expend funds for outstanding invoices from FSM Services in the amount of $3,650. Thank you. Pat?
Yes, we have two revisions to the board meeting schedule. The first one is for this current school year, and that's to add the education committee meetings, and they are in a little bit of a shading, so we'll need a motion.
Motion, Jim.
Say it again.
I move to approve the revised Board of Education meeting schedule for 2017-18 to add the Education Committee meetings as presented by the superintendent.
Second.
Second, thank you. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All those abstain? Okay, the motion passes to revise the board meeting schedule of 2017-18 as presented by the superintendent. Do you have another one?
Yes, and then the second one is to review and approve the board meeting schedule for 2018-2019 school year, and that's done every year at this time so that it can get to the state and the towns in January.
Do I have a motion? Jim?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstain? Motion passes to approve the board meeting schedule for 2018-19 as presented by the superintendent. Any future business notifications, Pat, other than what's on the agenda?
No, not at this point.
Okay, at this point, we will adjourn to executive session. Or
Mr. Chair.
recess. Do I have any motion?
Yeah, I think you need a motion. I move we go into executive session for personnel matters.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? I'd like to invite the superintendent and Bob Geeson to the executive session.
Okay, I just have to run
Keep
to the
forgetting.
Let's get into
Where are we
one.
going?
Oh, the door's
Behind
open.
us?
Yeah.
Keep forgetting.